how does the Central and Eastern Europe stand in all this? Before the accession of post-communist European societies to the European Union, Central Europe, especially Central Europe, was a very significant category, was a very important image of collective identity. Why? Because it allowed people of the region to say, to continue to speak in terms of maybe we are not yet completely Western, but please do not think that we are Eastern. Eastern Europe is different. Eastern Europe is further east. This was the position which one could particularly often come across in Czechoslovakia, or then Czech Republic and Slovakia, Hungary and Poland. They were the countries which, and the societies which had this idea of being very, very different from the East. And how was this difference constructed? Well, here culture certainly played an important role. Western Christianity vis-a-vis Eastern Christianity, Latin culture vis-a-vis East and Cyrillic, but also this kind of rather vague image of historical connections and belonging to historically developed Central Europe. There were especially for those countries and regions which had a history of belonging to Austro-Hungarian monarchy, to the Habsburg Empire. This created a rather significant point of reference in thinking about our collective identity. Of course, the boundaries constructed in this way often cut across national boundaries. For instance, southern Poland historically belonged to the Habsburgian Empire, but Western Poland, Northern and Eastern Poland didn't. Western Ukraine did, but Eastern Ukraine did not. There was also, of course, another alternative concept of Central Europe, the German Mitteleuropa, the German Central Europe, which as a maybe more problematic category to use because of the historical role of Germany in the region, but it kind of corresponded to the idea of German cultural influences, which again would cover most of the Polish territory, certainly the Czech Republic, Hungary, but also parts of Romania, Croatia, and everywhere where either German or Austrian cultural influences would be found. Also, of course, the Baltic states, which had a very considerable presence of historical and cultural influences of the German-speaking people. So this there was also, politically speaking, this creating a concept of Central Europe as significantly different from the East was something that could be seen as a bit arrogant, or maybe more than a little arrogant, because it was like a feeling of superior to countries which used to be also part of the Soviet bloc, but which were not seen as belonging to Central Europe, but rather to Eastern Europe. So I'm afraid that in spite of the strong effort to make everyone accept this category of Central Europe, it was not entirely successful, because I don't think that the countries of Central Europe were able to convince everyone, especially everyone in the West, that they were significantly better and more developed than more Eastern neighbors. And of course, in those more Eastern neighbors, that this tendency to create a separate identity generated some frustration and some negative feelings. So it wasn't entirely a successful attempt. Fortunately, I would say it lost the meaning largely after most of the countries of Central Eastern Europe became part of the European Union. Because within the European Union, once we are all accepted in the European Union, it doesn't make much sense anymore to try to build a distinctive separate identity of the center to suggest that those new members are kind of hyphenated Europeans, are Europeans with an adjective. It's much better to say we are just Europeans, as opposed to those who are not. This again creates a question of where the new border of Europe is going to be. Now, politically, of course, we know that the eastern border of Poland is the eastern border of the European Union, separated European Union from Belarus and Ukraine, and to some extent Russia. The Ukraine, of course, now is a very important issue, not only politically. We know conflict and potentially dangerous for the whole of Europe, but also a question of Ukrainian unity and whether Ukraine as a whole can be seen as belonging to one or another part of Europe. If we use the strategy which may be called a methodological nationalism, so if we speak in terms of a nation or nation state as a category, then if we speak about Ukraine as such, then we can say that Ukraine is having now an internal dilemma to solve, whether it wants to gravitate towards the West, potentially willing and actually willing and potentially able to join European structures, European community, or whether it should gravitate towards Russia. And we know that Russia proposed to Ukraine to accept it in a new Eastern structure of supranational integration. If we think in historical divisions, then of course Ukraine is divided into at least two major parts, maybe more. The Western Ukraine, which belonged politically to Poland and then to Austria, and then to Poland again, and which fell under the direct influence of Russia only after the Second World War, and the east of Ukraine, which was directly under the influence of Russia politically, culturally, has been under this influence since the late 17th century. So it's a huge historical difference in terms of being part of a larger civilizational sphere area. So how meaningful is this? Of course, without making any suggestion as to the future division of Ukraine, one has to take into account that there are different linguistic, cultural, historical connections and relations and links between different significant others, and that collective Ukrainian identity is of course quite a complex issue. We will see in the future whether Ukraine will unambiguously, as I said, gravitate towards the West or towards the East, or whether there will be more ambiguity, more internal division, more internal negotiation, which may take a while. And certainly, Ukraine is not at the moment ready to make the decision. Certainly isn't ready at the moment to join the European Union, but it has to be seriously taken into account whenever we discuss the concept of Central Eastern Europe. Central Eastern Europe is also Ukraine, the whole of it, or at least the western part of it. I think that in order to envisage, in order to foresee the future of Central Europe, we must take into account the future of Ukraine and relations between the European Union and Ukraine, and also more particularly relations between the Central Eastern European member states and Ukraine. So I think Ukraine may be a key factor in our discussions about European and Central Eastern European identity.